Hi, Chapter 5 of The Invisible Dog. And you remember at the end of Chapter 4, they had been at the dog show, and the winner of the dog show looked just like Henry. Chapter 5. The mailbox was at the end of the village, not much more than 100 yards from Janie's front gate. It was built into the garden wall of Mrs. Garrow's cottage, and Janie sometimes wondered how the old lady mailed any letters she might write. Did she go out into the lane and mail them from the front like everyone else? Or did she stay inside her garden and stretch over the wall and feel for the opening in the mailbox and mail them, so to speak, upside down? No, she probably wouldn't be tall enough, would she? One day, Janie found the answer. "Take this letter up to the mailbox for me, Janie, will you please?" her mother said. So Janie set off, the letter in one hand, the leash in the other, the collar around Henry's invisible neck. So there's Janie heading up the road to the mailbox. She was approaching the mailbox when she saw Mrs. Garrow come out of her front door, also carrying a letter, and walk across her little bit of lawn to a spot directly behind the bright red box. She'll never be able to do it. She's too short, Janie thought. But then Mrs. Garrow suddenly seemed to rise higher, and she leaned right over the top of the wall and mailed her letter. Straightening up, she saw Janie and let out a burst of quacking laughter. "Bet you thought I wasn't tall enough to do that," she said, "and nor would I be if it wasn't for these." And Janie could see that the old lady was standing on top of a pair of little wooden steps positioned behind the wall. "I always enjoy doing that, Janie," Mrs. Garrow said, "especially as I always feel somehow that the mailbox is mine, seeing as it's set in my wall." "Oh," said Janie, "is it all right if I mail my letter in it too?" "Of course it is," cried Mrs. Garrow with another volley of quacks. "Though I'm surprised to see you carrying it." "What do you mean?" Janie asked. "Well, I have thought that great animal of yours could be carrying it for you in his mouth. Some dogs do, you know. My, he's a size, isn't he? What's his name?" "Henry," said Janie. "Well, I never," said Mrs. Garrow. "Do you know what, Janie? That was my late husband's name." "Oh," said Janie, I'm sorry," she added. "Oh, no need to be sorry, dear," said Mrs. Garrow. "He's been dead and gone these 20 years, though never a day passes when I don't think of him. And you know what? There's a lot in common between your Henry and mine." "How do you mean?" Janie said. "Well, my Henry was a great big chap, too. He didn't need a stepladder to mail a letter." And that's Janie talking to Mrs. Garrow. And you see how Mrs. Garrow looks really tall? It's because she's standing up on steps behind the wall. And another thing, he was quiet, just like your dog. He doesn't bark much, does he? "No," Janie said. "Saw one just like him on the TV a couple of weeks ago," Mrs. Garrow said. "Some big dog show it was." "I saw it too," said Janie. "We went there." "Did you take Henry?" "No, but there was a dog there exactly like Henry, and he won the prize for best of breed. Another Harlequin Great Dane." "A Harlequin Great Dane, eh?" said Mrs. Garrow, and she looked down from her perch at the dangling collar and nodded. "I see," she said. "And Daddy says I can have a real one. I mean, another one, but only on one condition." "And what's that?" "I have to have 500 pounds. "That's a lot of money." "It's a fortune." Mrs. Garrow looked down at Janie and her invisible dog, and her wrinkled face creased some more into a smile. "Talking of fortunes, Janie," she said, "how would you like me to tell yours?" "Oh, could you?" "Oh, yes, please," said Janie. "Come in and have a cup of tea then." "Oh, thank you. What about Henry, though?" "He'd better stay in the garden. My old black cat doesn't like dogs." "All right," said Janie, and she went through the gate and dropped the collar and leash on the lawn. "Down, Henry," she said. "Stay." "Now," said Mrs. Garrow, after they had drunk their tea, "let's have a look at your cup." For a long time, she studied the tea leaves in the bottom of the cup very carefully. And boys and girls, I'll tell you that it's an old-fashioned way that people used to tell fortunes, is to look at the leaves from your tea that was left in the bottom of a cup of tea. So in England, they drink tea as their hot drink a lot. And so Mrs. Garrow is going to look at the leaves and see if she can tell Janie's fortune. Then she said, "Janie, I think you're going to be lucky." "Why? What can you see?" Janie asked. "Look," said Mrs. Garrow, handing the cup back. Janie looked in, but all she could see was a scatter of black tea leaves at the bottom of the white cup. "I can't see anything," she said. "You've got to know what you're looking for," said Mrs. Garrow. "There's a shape right there, all right. A great big shape it is, no doubt about it, and what's more, it's black and white." "A Harlequin Great Dane?" cried Janie. "Is that what it is?" Mrs. Garrow smiled her crinkly smile. "I shouldn't be surprised," she said. "And now you'd best get off home, or your mother will be wondering where you've got to." Out on the lawn, Janie picked up the end of the leash. "Heel, Henry," she said. Then she called, "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Garrow. I hope the tea leaves were right." "Talking of leaves," said Mrs. Garrow, "this lawn's covered in them. I better sweep them up. Bye-bye, Janie dear." "Goodbye," Janie said. For a moment, she stood in the lane by the mailbox, looking over the wall. On the lawn, old Mrs. Garrow was sweeping away with a long broomstick of birch twigs, watched by her black cat. A broomstick and a black cat, huh? Interesting. That's the end of the chapter. What do you think that the author and the illustrator were trying to make you think of when they showed you Mrs. Garrow and her black cat and her broom? Yeah, I kind of think the same. Okay, I'll see you next time for chapter 6.